and Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Today's video is about the Sugar Plum Fairy. She doesn't have wings, but I'm still calling her a fairy. I think it's artistic license or something like that. So I started with her face, as I always do. I am adding 2 pieces of clay on either side, equal parts, to create her eyebrows at this point. I'm using my 3/4 view reference in order to see how much her brow bone comes out. Carry on adding more equal parts of clay around her face, building up her cheeks and her eyes. I'm using my dental tools, as I always do, in my crosshatch style, which I don't know where that came from, to build up and to kind of draw in the clay. I'm also using my pointing tool and my ball tool. I love to use the ball tools, particularly between the bridge of the nose and the eyes. It's a really useful tool to get the nice roundness there, the nicer depth and shadow. And my pointy tool is my very trusted friend for around the eyes because it's so thin. Also, my needle tools I use around the eyes as well because they're so skinny. And because I'm sculpting a smile, I have to remember that the shape of the eyes is going to be a lot different. If the smile is coming into your eyes are going to crease up and they're going to change their shape quite a lot and become upside down half moon crescents almost. The best thing to do though is not, try to sculpt a shape from your head. Rather use reference if you can. Moving on to her ears, I always start with the hearing hole, and I use that as sort of my landmark and then build up from there, drawing out the rest of the ear and taking away clay where I need to. Also using my pointy tool as always and kind of my normal cross-hatching. Then once her head was baked, it's time to paint, and I'm using Genesis heat set paint, which I always use, and using a colour that is just a few tones darker than the colour of the clay so that you get a nice depth in all the shadows. I chose to make her eyebrows dark, and I wanted her to have quite a fair amount of makeup on because at the end of the day she is celebrating. Once the head was painted, I added it to the rest of the body, to the armature, the wire armature, and I started to build up the raw clay onto my wire armature. So the whole time I'm thinking about the pose that I'm doing. She's kind of bent over on herself, so this is a good one for her, where you have arms and legs that you can remove because her legs are crossed over themselves and her whole body is kind of curved in. So I have to think about that when I'm sculpting her back. Her back is kind of curved, so that changes a lot of the shape of the anatomy. So I'm just using my cross-hatching, as I always do, to create the shapes around the clavicle. I love the clavicle area. It's one of my favorite areas to sculpt. This time it's changing a lot of its shape again because her shoulders are bending forward, so the whole shape and look of the clavicle is different. The bones there are sticking out in a different way. This was a very useful armature, as I said before, because you can take the legs off. As you can see, I actually didn't do a lot of the sculpture of the legs while they were separate. I just built up an amount of clay on the legs before I put them back on the body. So there's kind of a mass of clay there already that you can then add more clay onto that. Because I do find that it's impossible for me to sculpt a leg separate from the body. I need the body as kind of a reference to then know how to sculpt the leg, how much volume to put on the leg, the size, the shape. The back was fun to sculpt because I love doing the areas where it sort of comes in at the waist, it goes out a little bit, and then it goes out even more at the bum area. I just find areas like that are just really, they just make me feel really good to sculpt them. I don't know what it is. Some areas of the body are just really enjoyable to sculpt. Once all of her body was sculpted, it's time to create her clothing, and she's going to be wearing a nice top, which I'm sculpting in clay, and then the rest of the body, the rest of the dress is in fabric. So I'm sculpting little flowers that go all the way around her bodice, and all of them are sculpted in clay, and leaving a little hole in the middle to be able to add in some jewelry. Once she was baked and her dress was baked, as you can see, some of those flowers need to be fixed because they broke off, the petals broke off. I don't think I had baked it for the full hour yet, and once those petals are baked for a full hour, they will be solid and they will be strong. So I went on to painting her back, and I wanted her to have a lovely big tattoo. So see, I'm kind of playing with words here because I'm calling her a fairy, but actually her Sugar Plum Fairy is her tattoo in this case. So she doesn't have wings of her own because they would have gotten in the way of the nice big tattoo that I wanted to paint. So I was painting her a Sugar Plum Fairy on her back. And so the Sugar Plum Fairy has wings. I started out by painting them pink, decided they needed to be green because there was just too much pink and purple in this composition. So I changed them to be green. I always start with the painting with sketching it out. So I'm sketching it out in a kind of darkish color, and then on top of that I then start to paint and block in all of the colors. So at this point I'm blocking in all of her hair. She wanted her to have lovely big blonde hair. I'm building up the layers of her skin, starting with the lighter or medium color, actually the medium color of her skin first. So blocking over all of that initial sketch that I did underneath, but you can feel confident to do that because it shines through, so you don't lose the basic outline of what you want to be painting. So I'm building up, going darker areas of the skin tone of the fairy, lighter areas on top of that. As you can see, my brush is never a good brush. It's always a little bit messy. I don't use particularly good quality brushes because I mess them very easily, so I use basically nail art brushes most of the time, and sometimes the bristles can splay out a bit, and as you can see here I cut the bristles, so when they start to splay I just cut off the rogue pieces. And if you go out of the lines or you make a mess with Genesis paint, it will not set until you heat set it, and so you can use a bit of mineral spirit on your brush and just wipe away any mess. So I'm continuing to build up that face using my dark color around the eyes, also a bit of shadow in the mouth. Then I'm adding more shadow of the skin, because now that I've got the eyes and the mouth sort of very clear, I go back and build up the bridge of the nose, the dark areas in between the bridge of the nose and the eyes, using my dark skin tone colors, just building up lots and lots of different skin tone colors until I get what I want. I want her cheeks to be kind of popping, so I added a little bit more light colors on her cheeks, adding some more dark around her eyes to accentuate her eyes. So I suppose she's looking a little bit like the figure itself, you know, with dark eyebrows, you know, dark around her eyes. Then I have to bring out her nose, so I'm using some more really dark to sort of bring out that nose a little bit more. Some more highlights on the forehead. Building up all these highlights and shadow areas kind of creates more of a 3D look to the face. Some more dark, and now some more dark in the areas, in the shadow areas, to really make her face look more angular. And then it was time to paint the rest of the body of her. She's kind of emulating the pose of the girl herself, so sort of like it's a reflection of the girl, if we want to go deep into it or find some symbolism. For me, it's just a really good excuse to do a lot of painting on the back of my figures. Needed to add some more highlights. I found her face was a little bit dark, so going back, I do this a lot. Painting takes me 2 days to just do a tiny little painting, because I'll go back and work back into it and sort of dry the layers in between sometimes if I feel like I'm happy with what I've done, but then I sometimes go back over it again. So I don't have any of the actual finishing of the paintings, but I hope that that has given you a good idea of how I go about painting my tattoo. So after I'd finished the tattoo, it had to go back in the oven, so she will have gone back into the oven for probably about an hour, just to really make sure that everything was very well baked. So once everything is baked and she's not going to go back in the oven at all, I then add the little details like the dress. I added all the little Swarovski crystals to her dress as well. I added flowers. Those flowers are made out of polymer clay and will have been baked separately, so they're baked separately to the body. You can do it on the body to make sure that they don't get squished in the whole process of baking. There's no reason to actually add them to the body before and bake them with the body. So I usually bake my flowers afterwards. I paint them separately, and then I glue them with Fabri-Tac usually to the body. So I wanted her to have flowers around her head and then to have really wild hair, because at the end of the day I want her to have an element of being a little bit fantasy, a little bit unreal. And of course she's sitting in the snow. I mean, really, who of us want to sit in the snow with a little skimpy dress on? I wanted her to look like she was a little bit unreal, a little bit like she was a fantasy creature. I hope you've enjoyed this, and once again I hope you have a wonderful Christmas day. Thank you to all my patrons on Patreon for supporting me. I really appreciate every one of you. If you'd like to join me on Patreon, I'd be so happy to welcome you into my studio. I'm currently uploading 1 hour of sculpting tutorials each month. At the moment we're making the salty mermaid in a cup. If you join, you'll also gain access to over 250 videos I've already posted, which include hours of real-time tutorial footage. For example, I document the entire process of sculpting a man, a smiling face, and a child. You can also sign up for my mailing list for free by clicking on the link in the video description. Everyone who signs up gets a free in-depth sculpting a nose tutorial. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and click on the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Thank you. See you again soon.